minutes. So my name's McLaughlin. I've been a butcher for 23 years now. Has anyone taken a class here at CTR? He's an instructor. Perfect. A couple of you. Yeah. Recognize a few faces. So won't go into the whole detail about my career, but yeah, I've been in the industry for 23 years now and do a lot of work with CTR here. Lots of sausage making classes. And today we're going to be doing a pork demo for you. So what I'm going to be showing you guys here with this pork leg is I'm going to break it down into its individual pieces, the different primals or subprimals that we get out of it, and then we're going to go ahead and break those down further and do some fancy things with them, just to show you a little bit of what you can do out of a leg here. So at any point during this demo though, if there's questions, if I'm doing something that you want to know more about, please just shout it out, put your hand up, whatever, because we want this to be as interactive as possible. Sound good? Perfect. So is there any questions at this point about what we're doing? No?
Where'd you get it?
Where'd I get it? So I got this pork leg from the butcher shop I work at up in Olds, and we get these pigs from a colony just outside of Olds there. So they raise them, they get processed at family meats, and then they ship them down to us as sides, and then we cut up the sides there. And we do about 28 sides, so 28 sides a week usually. So this pig here was about 89 kilos, and this leg here itself is 13 kilos, so about 27, 28 pounds is what we're working with here. Okay? So what I'm going to do is start breaking this down. So my first step is to remove the foot or the trotter, and then I'm going to skin this whole piece, okay? We'll talk about the skins and different uses out of that, and then we will move into deboning this piece into the different muscles that we can get out of it. By show of hands, who here does their own butchery? Game meat, domestic meat?
Both.
Both? Yeah, perfect. What domestic meat you work with?
A lot of pigs.
A lot of pigs, perfectly. When you do your legs, do they usually go in hams, or do you break them right down?
Ham sometimes, or I'll even run them through the bandsaw and just make steaks.
Make some
out of
steaks, and yeah, perfect. So we're going to go a little bit step further. We're going to debone this whole thing into its individual muscles, so that'll be good for you. So like I said, first step is the foot. So you can see the foot actually ends right at this muscle here. So that's the beginning of our shank meat. So I'm going to break it off just right above there. Just to get through my...
Oh, okay, that's too far.
my back foot here. So now, is there any use for the hind foot that anyone can think of?
Pea soup.
Pea soup, you could definitely do a soup out of it. And that's almost, ideally, what it would be best for is soups or pickled pig's feet, right? That's a really big thing that a lot of people like to do with it. Other people use them as, dog treats, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, there's not a lot of meat in this, a lot of just kind of connective tissues, that sort of stuff. So it definitely is something that we need to be kind of rendered down, cooked down. So pickling, soups is usually what that is used for.
Did you take it off below the joint?
So the joint for the actual foot is higher, and I like to cut it down below it so that I can get through that bone, because then I can use the hock here, and I can actually make some different cuts out of it. If I break it off right at the joint, then basically all I can do with it is either just leave it whole or bone it out for trim. So I'm actually broke it off there so that I can separate the two bones that actually make up the hock piece.
So the connection on the hamstring is actually on the hock right there. There you go. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go.
yeah, where they hold it up there, yeah. So now I'm going to start skinning this piece here. So I'm just running my knife down, opening up our skin. And what I want to do is work my way down towards the back end of the ham, or the leg, sorry. And I want to open up both pieces to get it laying flat, and then I can come across and skin out the back. That way I'm not going to cut into the muscle, or not, hopefully not cut into the muscle a lot. When you get to the back end of the ham, or the leg, the skin does tighten up, and you do lose a bit of that fat cover, and then that does make it a bit harder for the skinning process. Now I have my tail. And the tail joints are quite annoying actually, but you can get in there and break them off. Or just use your saw and separate it, which I will. These little saws, it's got a nice new blade on it there. Hence why it likes to bite in. So now that I have that separated, I can work my way around and down. So now you can see that that skin is separated from the top, laying down flat. So I can then flip it over, and it can now begin to skin around the leg and around the curvature of the leg. So the trick here is to keep the skin pulled tight. And that's going to allow me to get that knife in, angle it up towards the fat, and not cut into the muscle. And then when you start to get up to the shank section here, that's when it begins to really tighten up. You can see how thin that fat cover has actually gotten. So all you can really do is just pull that skin tight, keep your knife at the correct angle, and work your way through that skin. Biggest mistake people will do is they will start skinning this out at the hock or the shank end here. And what that does is it works them right into this tight muscle or the low fat end here. And then they actually end up starting to cut into the muscle. So the biggest thing is to always start at the back end. So the way I used to describe it to students, because I used to work at Olds College, is if something was laying on a cradle, you were always skinning it essentially from the belly side down to the back. So you would always still do that even as it was a primal or a piece. You would always find kind of the belly section, skin down towards the back. That way you're working around the animal, okay? So this is skinned out. This is ready to now be broken down into smaller pieces, as well as turned into some different cuts. So the skin section here, does anyone like pork rinds? Show of hands. 3 people, that's it? Pork rinds are fantastic. I personally am a big fan. But this entire piece could be made into pork rinds. It's a bit of a process with drying them out and then deep frying and everything like that. But that's what this piece could be used for. Or as well as if you are into sausage making, you can actually strip fat off of the skin. So you could take this entire piece of skin and pull all of that fat off of it, which could then be used for sausage making, especially if you do game sausage and you need that fat to go in there.
Have you ever have heard of speckies in the Dutch?
Speckies?
Do they take, is that where they get the rind from when they fry it in a pan and get the
and then they wrinkle it right down and it's really
little
small
crunchy
pieces.
Yeah.
Speckies, what else was that called? Like scrunchions.
Is
I've
that-
heard cracklings as well. Yeah.
And so is that from
It's-
that right there?
This the back skin, so basically any clean skin from the animal, that's exactly where they would use it from. Yeah. So it's usually ground down and then fried, all the fat and everything, and they're nice and crunchy and crispy. Yeah, they're quite nice. So Once again, there's still some uses there. There's that little piece of tail left. He could also go in with our soups. So we still have, so just out of the skin and that foot, we have some soups that we could make, as well as we have some different ingredients that we could add into our sausage, so for some further production. So now I'm going to start removing muscles from this piece here. So this is a long cut leg, or European cut, which means that it has the sirloin, or as we call it on pork, the buckeye, is still left on it, okay? So that is the sirloin section, or the butt section, and that actually has tenderloin still left in it up here as well. The tenderloin most people think is just within that kind of the back section or the loin section, but it actually extends from the loin all the way up into the H-bone, which is the hip bone right here. The tenderloin comes up and ends right at the top here. So I'm going to get that removed. And this part here that I'm removing, this is what's known as the butt tender. Once again, because it's sitting in the butt section of the animal. So that's the tenderloin removed, and this is the small piece of tenderloin here. This little excess piece of meat is skirt steak, which on a pork is so small and minuscule, it's not really worth saving. You could make something like stir fry or stew, or we could just use it for trimmings for sausage or ground pork. So what I'm removing here is a lymph node tract, which we will just discard because we don't want to be consuming lymph nodes. Just cleaning up some of the fat that is sitting on this tenderloin here. And now you can see there's some silver skin on it, which most people remove. But I find with pork it's almost unnecessary, just because of the simple fact that it's not that tough. Once you cook this, it would render down and become very similar to like a fat, and it wouldn't be very chewy or tough, so you can actually leave that on there, and that's going to be just fine to consume as is. Beef, you're always going to see that piece removed, but it's a lot tougher as the animal gets larger. So now my next step is going to be removing this bone here, the H bone. So this is essentially the hip bone, but it's been cut in half as the carcass is split, okay? So there's a little bit of muscle in here, which is known as oyster meat. On a beef, it is sometimes kept and sold. They'll call it like a spider steak or oyster meat. But personally, I like to just throw it all into trim, because what section of the pork is this section here, right under the tail, right around the leg?
And rectum.
That's the rectum, so that's your butt right there. So this is kind of the sphincter muscle. That is controlling digestional tract, that kind of stuff. Personally, I like to just put that right into trim. Everybody likes to sit there, cook it up, that kind of thing. I don't find any use for that. Throw it into trim. It does get a lot of use, so it is kind of chewy. So once again, throw it into trim, get rid of it. But by cleaning that out, we now have access to our bone. So this bone is completely on its own, except for where it's connected now to the femur bone, internally on the leg. So I'm going to start by working my way down into the bone and underneath. So as I'm doing this here, I will turn this just to show you guys some specific points when I'm cutting into it here. So can everybody see the beginning of that leg bone right there? So there is a tendon in there that you can actually see on the top as well, and that's what's actually holding this in. A little bit of membrane underneath, but that tendon is the main tendon holding this together. Once I separate that, you're going to see this pop right open. See See how much more that's opened up for us? So now that allows me to get in and underneath it. And once again, by putting tension on that bone, just like when I was doing the skinning, it's opening it up and that's pulling everything away from the muscle. And that allows me to just work right along the edge of that bone into my tail. And then I can almost peel the rest of that bone out.
How would this be different if that wasn't a half? Like if you're on a deer and it's the entire.
So
pelvis
if you were on
together?
a deer, so essentially this would be connected.
Yeah, the other half.
And you would have the other half there. So what I always like to do if you're working with a whole animal like that is I'll take the one leg and as it's hanging, so I'll hang it by one leg, then the leg that's loose, I will pull it off and it will split off just like this.
Okay.
As you come down, this bone here can either be cut through with a saw, or on most deer, if they're younger especially, it can actually be cut through with a knife.
Right.
On pork, this is usually always split with a knife as well. So it's usually very easy to separate that. You can usually cut your tail off, and then basically you would just follow down through the same joint and that leg would come off.
Right. Okay.
And then you could either hang it up by the loin, or once you do the rest of your boning, you could put that other leg onto the block and pull the rest of the bone out as is. So now all we have left in this is our femur bone up into our back shank. So this bone here, little bit of trimming to do on it here, but not very much. Pork is tough in the way that you can't get the bones as clean as you can with beef, because it's a younger animal, the bones are softer, so if you really drag your knife and scrape it, try to peeling things out to get them completely clean, you're going to get a lot of bone skin and bone chunks. They're going to flake off, and then that's all going to end up in your trim, and then before you know it, you got bone chunks and that kind of stuff. So, like I said, we don't want to do dirty work or anything like that, but you can't drag that knife right tight, scrape along the bone, peeling it like you see with a lot of beef videos and that kind of stuff, because you're going to end up with, you know, bone chunks, bone skin in your grinds. But this piece here, once again, can easily go into our soup pile. So now the next piece I'm going to remove is going to be this back hock. There is a seam that you see that actually just really wants to open right up. That seam is going to lead me right to the joint, and that's where I'm going to separate this back hock. So how much of my knife am I using here? What are you guys watching?
First inch.
Just about an inch of the tip there. That way you have control. Once again, biggest issue I see people making when they're butchering and working at home is they'll try and use that whole knife. So they'll try and open that joint up using that whole knife, but as you can see, all of that knife is now into that muscle that I don't want to damage.